Namaste and welcome to Daily News Simplified, the what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we would be analyzing the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper of 29th May 2018. Now let us begin. Now we have taken this article from page 9. Now what this article talks about is that it gives highlights of a recent study by a professor of IIT Bombay, which was titled Does Environment Matter for Foreign Direct Investment? Testing the Pollution Haven Hypothesis for Indian States. Now, what we'll do with regards to this article is understand the various highlights given in this report with regards to the impact of environment on foreign direct investment. However, it is not required for you to remember the name or the title of the report, but what is required for you to remember is the various highlights of this study. Now, the first thing that we need to know from this study is what is pollution haven hypothesis. Now, the pollution haven hypothesis states that global industries flock to places with low environmental regulation. Now, the second aspect of this study is whether foreign direct investment or FDI is linked to easing of environmental regulations, wherein according to the study, environmental regulations do not influence a foreign firm's decision towards the location of the industry, wherein the study shows that environmental regulations have little impact on the flow of foreign direct investment. Now, the third aspect is what factors was the foreign direct investment or FDI dependent upon when choosing a location. Now, according to this study, FDI was majorly dependent upon infrastructure and labor when choosing upon their location. Now, the fourth aspect of this study that you should understand is what is pollution abatement cost. Now, the abatement cost is the cost of reducing or removing negative byproducts during production. And these negative byproducts can be in form of pollutants which have to be removed in compliance with the environmental regulations. Now, the fifth aspect that this article talks about is what is the seen impact of environmental regulations on industry. Now, according to this paper, in theory, higher cost in dealing with pollution from an industry shows strictly that environmental norms are in place. Now, hopefully, up till here, you have understood that this article provides the highlights of a recent study by a professor at IIT Bombay, which was titled Does Environment Matter for Foreign Direct Investment? Testing the Pollution Haven Hypothesis for Indian States. Now, it is not required for you to remember the name of the author or the title of the report, but what is required for you to remember is the various highlights of this study. Now, the first aspect from this article that you should understand is what is pollution haven hypothesis. Now, it means that global industries flock to places with low environmental regulations. So, let's say if there's a company A and it has the ability to decide whether it can invest in state number 1 or state number 2. And according to the pollution haven hypothesis, company A would invest in a place which has lower environmental regulations. So if state number 2 has lower environmental regulations, then according to this hypothesis, company A would invest in that state. Now, the second aspect that this article talks about is whether FDI is linked to easing of environmental regulations. And according to this study, environmental regulations do not influence a foreign firm's decision towards where they would locate. So according to the study, it does not matter whether state 1 has lower environmental regulations or state 2 has lower environmental regulations. What matters are the factors of infrastructure and labor upon which an FDI is dependent upon when choosing its location. So it is more likely that if the state 1 has better infrastructure and provides more labor, then company A would invest its FDI in state 1. Now, the third aspect that you should understand from this article is what is pollution abatement cost. Now, it is the cost of reducing or removing the negative byproducts such as pollutants during production, which has to be done in compliance with the environmental regulations. Now, the final aspect that this article talks about is what is the seen impact of environmental regulations on industry. And according to this article, in theory, higher cost in dealing with pollution from an industry shows strictly that environmental norms are in place. So it means that if company A is spending a lot more in state 1 in terms of its pollution abatement cost, then it shows that state 1 has good environmental norms in place. And if in state 2 a company is spending less in terms of its pollution abatement cost, then in theory, according to this article, state 2 would have easier environmental norms. Now hopefully up till here you understood the basic aspects that this article talks about. Now let us understand the scenario in India. Now according to the study, states with high number of chemical industries will have a higher environmental cost, irrespective of the regulation that exists in that location. Now the second aspect highlighted in the article with regards to the scenario in India is that Chandigarh, Odisha and Karnataka have high environmental stringency, while according to the study, Bihar, Delhi and the northeastern states have low environmental stringency. Now hopefully up till here you've understood the environmental stringency scenario in India according to the article which has quoted the report. Now the first aspect highlighted in the article is that states with high number of chemical industries in India will have higher environmental cost, and this would be irrespective of the environmental regulations that exist within that location. Moreover, the article also highlights that Chandigarh, Odisha and Karnataka have the highest environmental stringency, while Bihar, Delhi and the northeastern states have the lowest environmental stringency. Now the correlation between environment and FDI would become a part of GS paper 1 in geography of the world, and more specifically factors responsible for the location of primary, secondary or tertiary sector industries in parts of India, wherein you would be able to correlate environmental regulations and their impact on the location of industries, which we had just covered. And moreover, this article and the explanation given in this section would also be placed in GS paper 3 in terms of correlation between economic development and environment, in terms of what would be the impact of environment on FDI. And so now with this, we move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 9. Now the context of this article is in reference to the 20th anniversary of India's nuclear test at Pokhran. Now the focus of this article is that deterrence through nuclear capability has ensured Pakistan a balance of power against India. Now before moving forward, you should understand as to what is meant by deterrence. Now deterrence is the action of discouraging another action or event through instilling a fear of the consequences. Now according to the author, this deterrence can be seen in India's restrained action against Pakistan after the 2001 Parliament attack and the 2008 Mumbai attack. Moreover, according to the author, the balance of power has further tilted in Pakistan's favor due to India's no first use policy. Now, under this no first use policy, India would attack its enemy country with nuclear weapons only if the enemy country has also used nuclear weapons or chemical or biological weapons against India. And apart from these circumstances, India would not be the first country to use nuclear weapons. Moreover, according to the author, Pakistan further threatens the use of theatre nukes, which would then reduce India's ability for a limited war. Now, theatre nukes are small in size and are meant to be used in the battlefield against enemy soldiers or enemy equipment, and Pakistan has threatened the use of theatre nukes against India in a battlefield in a limited or a full-out war. And this use of theatre nukes by Pakistan would reduce India's ability for a limited war. So for example, the Kargil war was a form of limited war wherein it was confined largely to the Jammu Kashmir region and did not involve the use of ballistic weapons. But if Pakistan were to use a theatre nuke against India in a battlefield, such as during the Kargil war, it would reduce India's ability to have a limited or a confined war. Now hopefully up till here you have understood that the author has made the assertion that nuclear capability has ensured Pakistan a balance of power against India through the capability of deterrence. And according to the author, this deterrence effect can be seen in the restrained action against Pakistan that India had undertook after the 2001 Parliament attack and the 2008 Mumbai attack. Moreover, according to the author, the balance of power has further tilted in Pakistan's favor due to India's no first use policy. Moreover, the author has further asserted that the use of theatre nukes by Pakistan has further reduced India's ability for limited war. Now this article and the explanation given in this section would be placed in GS paper 2 in the international relations section, and moreover would also be placed in GS paper 3 in the security section. And with this section you have a specific understanding of the reasons on how deterrence through nuclear capability has ensured Pakistan a balance of power against India. And so now with this we move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from the editorial page on page 8. Now what this article talks about is that it highlights various confidence building measures that are being taken and those that should be taken in the future in Jammu and Kashmir. Now, the first confidence building measure highlighted in this article is that there should be substantial dialogue between the Government of India and between Hurriyat and Pakistan, as offered by the Home Minister Rajnath Singh. The second confidence building measure that the article highlights is that the Cease Ops has provided a pause to the cycle of violence in Kashmir. The third confidence building measure, according to the editorial, is that cordon and search operations by the security forces should be restrained further. The fourth confidence building measure highlighted in the article is that damage to fruit orchards by security forces should be minimized. And the final confidence building measure highlighted in this article, which is required to be taken in Jammu and Kashmir, is that there should be an engagement between the Government of India and the local media in Kashmir to shift the popular narrative. Now, hopefully, up till here, you've understood that the article highlights various confidence building measures that are being taken and those that are required to be taken in Jammu and Kashmir. Now, the first confidence building measure highlighted in this article is that there should be substantial dialogue between the Government of India, Hurriyat, and Pakistan due to the recent offer of talks given by the Home Minister of India. The second confidence building measure highlighted in this article is that Cease Operations has provided a pause to the cycle of violence in Kashmir. The third factor highlighted in this article is that cordon and search operations by security forces should be restrained further. The fourth measure highlighted in the article is that damage to fruit orchards by the security forces should also be further minimized. And the final confidence building measures that the article highlights that is required to be taken in Jammu and Kashmir is that there should be further engagement between the government and the local Jammu and Kashmir media to shift the popular narrative in the government's favor. Now, you have to understand that the news covered in this article is currently in transition. So we have to wait and see on how the offer by the Home Minister of India for talks with Hurriyat and Pakistan goes forward, how the Cease Ops declared by the Government of India continues further in decreasing the cycle of violence in Kashmir, and moreover, we also have to wait and see on how the situation moves forward with regards to the various confidence building measures that have been highlighted in this article that should be taken in Jammu and Kashmir. And so now with this, we move on to the next article. Now we have taken the lead editorial from page 8. Now the author in this article highlights three issues with regards to the judiciary that needs attention. Now the first issue highlighted by the author is of the elevation of K.M. Joseph, who is currently the Chief Justice of Uttarakhand High Court, to a judge of the Supreme Court. The second issue, according to the author, is the allegations of corruption in the higher judiciary. And the third issue, according to the author, that requires attention is the position of Chief Justice of India as the master of the roster. Now you have to understand that all these three topics have been comprehensively covered in previous DNS. Now apart from this, the author has made several assertions within the article, wherein one of the assertions, such as the collegium system, is simply unworkable and is opaque, inequitable, and contains not a single constitutionally provided check or balance. And in similar terms, the author has made several other loaded assertions. And because of these reasons, we would not be analyzing the lead article today. And so now with this, we move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 10. Now you have to understand this article in the form of the continued coverage of the Iranian nuclear deal issue. Now, as you know, recently the United States took the decision to withdraw from the Six Nation Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action Nuclear Agreement, or what is more popularly known as the Iranian nuclear deal. And the United States has stated that countries or companies that continue to have business transactions with Iran could face sanctions from the United States. Now, with regards to that, India has said it will not accept sanctions imposed by the United States on Iran. And the reason India will not accept these sanctions is because India only recognizes UN sanctions and not country-specific sanctions. However, according to the United States, countries that continue to deal with Iran could face sanctions, and these sanctions may impact Iranian oil supply to India and Indian investment in the Chabahar port. Now hopefully up till here you have understood that this article should be seen in the form of a continued coverage of the Iranian nuclear deal issue, wherein recently India has said that it will not accept sanctions imposed by the United States on Iran. And India will not accept these sanctions because India recognizes only UN sanctions and not country-specific sanctions. While the United States has stated that countries that continue to deal with Iran could face sanctions. And if the United States imposes sanctions on India or Indian companies, it may impact Iranian oil supply to India and Indian investment in the Chabahar port. Now you have to understand that the news with regards to the Iranian nuclear deal issue is currently in transition. But the Iranian nuclear deal issue is relevant with regards to your mains examination, wherein previously a question has been asked in the GS paper of 2012, which had asked on how have the US sanctions against Iran affected India's bilateral relations with Iran. So hopefully you have understood India's stand with regards to US sanctions on Iran. And so now with this, we move on to the next article. Now the first article, national parties are under the RTI Act, has been taken from today's newspaper, while the second article, parties out of preview of RTI Act, has been taken from yesterday's newspaper. And you have to understand that there has been an updation in the news. Now yesterday a news was covered on the Election Commission, wherein an order was given by the Election Commission, wherein it held that political parties are out of the purview of the Right to Information Act. However, today the Election Commission has clarified that national political parties are public authorities under the Right to Information Act of 2005, wherein the Election Commission has clarified that it supports the Central Information Commission's order of June 2013 that declared national parties as public authorities under the RTI Act of 2005. Now hopefully up till here you have understood that there has been an updation in the news, wherein yesterday's article has stated that the Election Commission has said that political parties are out of the purview of the Right to Information Act. However, today the Election Commission has given a clarification that national political parties are public authorities under the Right to Information Act of 2005 and thereby supports the Central Information Commission's order of June 2013 that declared national parties as public authorities under the Right to Information Act of 2005. Now the Central Information Commission has stated that all information about contributions and the annual audited account of these national parties, when submitted to the Commission, it shall be put in public domain. Now hopefully up till here you have also understood the second feature of this news, that the Central Information Commission has stated that all information about contributions to such parties and their annual audited accounts when submitted to the Central Information Commission would be put in the public domain. Now hopefully you have understood the updation in the news as to whether the national parties are under the Right to Information Act or not. And you understand that the Election Commission has clarified that national political parties are public authorities under the Right to Information Act of 2005 and thereby supports the Central Information Commission's order of June 2013 that declared national parties as public authorities under the Right to Information Act of 2005. And since national political parties are public authorities, the Central Information Commission has stated that all information with regards to their contribution and annual audited accounts when submitted to the Central Information Commission would be put in the public domain as they are public authorities under the Right to Information Act of 2005. And so now with this we move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 9. Now the focus of this article is that it analyzes the performance of the Jan Dhan Yojana. Now according to the author, the recently released World Bank Global Findex data shows that 80% of Indian adults have a bank account as compared to 53% in 2015. However, only 48% of those who have an account in a financial institution made no form of withdrawal or deposit in the past 1 year. Now the second aspect of analysis of this article is access to formal credit, wherein according to this article, access to credit can be assessed from the credit deposit ratio, when the credit deposit ratio tells us how much credit can be availed per 100 rupees deposit. So according to the article, the credit deposit ratio for the rural population has increased from 41% in 1999 to around 67% in 2016, wherein according to the authors, this rise took place before the Jan Dhan Yojana was announced. And according to the article, since 2014, the credit deposit ratio in rural areas has stagnated. And according to the authors, the Jan Dhan Yojana does not signify any form of increase to access to formal credit. Now hopefully up till here you've understood the focus of this article, that it analyzes the performance of the Jan Dhan Yojana, wherein according to the article, the World Bank Global Findex data report has shown that 80% of Indian adults have a bank account, which has increased from 53% in 2014. But the authors have also stated that 48% of those who have an account made no form of withdrawal or deposit within the past year. Now, another aspect that this article analyzes the performance of the Jan Dhan Yojana is its access to formal credit, wherein, according to the authors, access to credit can be assessed from the credit deposit ratio, wherein the credit deposit ratio tells how much credit can be availed per 100 rupees of deposit. And according to the article, the credit deposit ratio for the rural population has increased from 41% in 1999 to 67% in 2016. However, according to the author, most of this rise occurred prior to the launch of the Jan Dhan Yojana. And moreover, since 2014, the credit deposit ratio for rural population has actually stagnated. And therefore, according to the authors, the Jan Dhan Yojana does not signify any form of increase in access to formal credit. Now, the next aspect that this article uses for analysis is on small borrowers, wherein, according to this article, RBI provides figures for small borrowers, which defines them as those with outstanding loans of under 2 lakhs. And according to the article, the share of small borrowers in total credit has been falling after the launch of this Yojana. And therefore, according to this article, the Jan Dhan Yojana has provided no increase to access to credit to small borrowers. And therefore, according to the authors, financial inclusion is not just about opening bank accounts, but also using these accounts for providing access to formal credit. And therefore, the authors have listed several drawbacks to the Jan Dhan Yojana, wherein the first drawback is that there is no incentive to use these accounts. The second drawback is that there is a lag in providing access to formal credit. Now, hopefully, you have also further understood the last level of analysis used by the authors, which is small borrowers, to judge the performance of the Jan Dhan Yojana, wherein the RBI classifies small borrowers as those who have outstanding loans of under 2 lakh. And according to the authors, the share of small borrowers in total credit has been falling after the Jan Dhan Yojana was launched. And therefore, according to the authors, the Jan Dhan Yojana has provided no increase to access to credit to small borrowers, wherein the authors have concluded their analysis of the performance of the Jan Dhan Yojana by saying that financial inclusion is not just about opening bank accounts, but also using this account for providing access to formal credit, and have highlighted two major drawbacks of the Jan Dhan Yojana, wherein the first drawback is that there is no incentive to use the account under the Jan Dhan Yojana, and the second drawback is that there is a lack in providing access to formal credit to account holders under the Jan Dhan Yojana. Now, with regards to UPSC syllabus, now this article and the explanation given in this section, which analyzes the performance of the Jan Dhan Yojana, would be placed in GS paper 2 under the subsection Welfare Schemes for Vulnerable Sections of the Population by the Central Government. And in similar terms, it would also be placed in GS paper 3 in the subsection Inclusive Growth and Issues Arising from It. Now, previously, a question has been asked in your UPSC examination, which was asked in the GS paper 3 of 2016, which had asked within the context of financial inclusion with regards to the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana. And similarly, you would also be able to answer a question which asks for the analysis of the performance of the Jan Dhan Yojana. And so now with this, we move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 11. Now what this article talks about is the recent glitches that have occurred with the usage of VVPAT. So what we'll do with regards to this article is get a basic understanding as to what is VVPAT. Now VVPAT is a printer-like apparatus as shown here in this image, and it is linked to the electronic voting machine or to the EVM as also shown in this image. So when a vote is casted in the EVM machine, a receipt is generated which shows the serial number, name and symbol of the candidate for whom the vote was casted. Now this receipt forms a second line of verification and therefore becomes a method to know with certainty that the vote casted has gone to the desired candidate. Now hopefully up till here you have understood as to what is VVPAT, what does it do, and why is it important. Now apart from this, you should also know that in 2013, the Conduct of Election Rules 1961 was amended to facilitate the introduction of VVPAT. And therefore in the same year, VVPAT with EVM was first used in the Nobsan Assembly seat in the Tuansang district, Nagaland. And also in the same year, in the Subramaniam Swamy versus Election Commission of India case, the Supreme Court directed the Election Commission of India to use VVPAT with EVM machines. Now hopefully up till here you have understood as to how VVPAT was first introduced, where it was first used, and what was the view of the Supreme Court on VVPAT. And now with this we come to an end in the analysis of today's paper. Now we move on to the question for today.